A boy was selling candy on the street to help his wheelchair-bound mother, but one day he saw her walking towards a luxury hotel, and discovered a secret that would change their lives forever. You'll be amazed by this true story of emotion, but first, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for 10 years of good luck. The scorching sun beat down on the city streets, but that didn't stop Jack. At just 18 years old, he tirelessly roamed the avenues, offering candy to passers-by. His gaze, though tired, shone with determination. Each coin he earned was a step closer to his dream, to give his mother, Sarah, a better life. Sarah, a 40-year-old woman who radiated a melancholic beauty, waited patiently in her wheelchair on the usual corner. Her skilled hands transformed candy wrappers into delicate paper flowers that she offered in exchange for a few coins. Despite her condition, her smile never faltered, especially when she saw her son approaching. "How's it going, Mom?" Jack asked, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Good, sweetie. The flowers are selling well today," Sarah replied, showing him a few coins in her lap. Jack knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "One of these days, Mom, I promise we won't have to do this anymore. We're going to have a better life." Sarah caressed her son's face tenderly. "My Jack, I already have everything I need with you by my side." But fate had other plans for this family. That same afternoon, as Jack pushed his mother's wheelchair back home, a luxurious car passed by them, splashing them with water from a puddle. The vehicle abruptly stopped, and an elegant woman hurriedly got out. "I'm so sorry," exclaimed the woman, approaching them with concern. "Are you all right? Please, let me help you." Jack was about to respond when he noticed that his mother had frozen, her eyes wide open. He followed her gaze and found something that left him breathless. The woman from the car was identical to his mother. The stranger, upon seeing Sarah, also stood petrified. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the two women stared at each other, as if they were seeing their own reflections. This is impossible," murmured the woman from the car, bringing a trembling hand to her lips. Sarah, still in shock, could only whisper, "Who are you?" Jack, confused and alarmed, looked from one to the other. "Mom, what's going on? Who is she?" The woman from the car, visibly shaken, introduced herself. "My name is Elizabeth Parker. I'm the owner of the Golden Hotel." She paused, as if gathering courage, and added, "And I think I might be your sister." Sarah brought her hands to her chest, her breathing rapid. "It can't be. I always knew I had a twin sister, but they told me she had died at birth." Elizabeth knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair, her eyes filled with tears. "All my life I've felt that something was missing. I was adopted as a baby, I never knew my biological family." Jack, still trying to process what was happening, intervened, "This is crazy. How can you be sure?" Elizabeth took an old photograph from her purse. "This is the only photo I have of my biological mother. I've always carried it with me." With trembling hands, Sarah took the photograph. Her eyes filled with tears as she recognized the woman in the image. It's our mother," she said in a broken voice. Traffic continued around them, but for them, the world had stopped. Jack observed the scene, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. His mother, who had always been his rock, his strength, now seemed so vulnerable. Elizabeth, regaining some composure, said, "Please, come with me. We can't keep talking here on the street. My hotel is nearby, we can talk more calmly there." Jack looked at his mother, seeking her approval. Sarah, still in shock, nodded slowly. "Let's go," she said quietly. As Elizabeth guided them to her car, Jack couldn't help but notice the contrast between his newly discovered aunt's elegance and his mother's and his own humble appearance. How was it possible that twin sisters had led such different lives? The journey to the Golden Hotel was short but charged with tense silence. Jack watched out the window as the buildings became increasingly luxurious, entering a world he had only seen from afar. Upon arriving at the imposing Golden Hotel, Elizabeth quickly led them through the luxurious lobby to a private elevator. Jack pushed his mother's wheelchair, noticing how she shrank from the curious glances of guests and staff. Once in the presidential suite, Elizabeth invited them to sit down. Please, make yourselves comfortable. We have a lot to talk about. Sarah, still dazed, looked around in amazement. Elizabeth, how did you come to all this? Elizabeth smiled sadly. It's a long story, sister. But first, I want to know everything about you. How has your life been? How did you end up? Her voice trailed off, discreetly gesturing to the wheelchair. Sarah took a deep breath. It hasn't been easy, but I've had my Jack. She took her son's hand, who squeezed it affectionately. 10 years ago, I had an accident. Since then, I've been in this chair. We survived by selling candy and flowers on the street. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Sarah, if I had known, if I had found you sooner. Jack, who had been observing in silence, finally spoke. How is it possible that you haven't found each other before? How could they separate you? Elizabeth stood up and walked to the window, her gaze lost in the city horizon. That's the question I've asked myself all my life, Jack. I always knew I was adopted, but my adoptive parents could never give me many details about my origin. I only had that photo and a name, Dolores. Sarah startled at hearing that name. Dolores. I remember my mother mentioning that name sometimes. She said it was the nurse who attended to her when we were born. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of that information settled in. Jack was the first to break it, so, this Dolores could be the key to understanding what happened. Elizabeth nodded slowly. It could be. But after so many years, how could we find her? Maybe. Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly, maybe we don't need to find her. Maybe she'll find us. Jack looked at his mother with concern. What do you mean, Mom? Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. A few months ago, an older woman started frequenting the corner where we sell. She always observed me from afar, but never approached. One day, she dropped her purse near me. When I returned it to her, she looked at me intently and said, "You're identical to her." Then she hurried away. I never understood what she meant, until now. Elizabeth quickly approached Sarah, taking her hands. Do you think that woman could be Dolores? I'm not sure, Sarah replied, but now that I think about it, her behavior was very strange. As if she knew me, or as if she was afraid of me. Jack stood up, his mind working at full speed. If that woman is Dolores, and if she appears again, we could have the chance to discover the truth. Elizabeth nodded with determination. We have to find her. It's the only way to know what really happened. As the sun set over the city, bathing the sweet in golden tones, the three looked at each other, united by a newly discovered bond and by the promise of unveiling a mystery that had defined their lives without them knowing it. Sarah took Elizabeth and Jack's hands. Whatever happens, we're together now. And together, we'll uncover the truth. The first chapter of their story was coming to an end, but it was only the beginning of an adventure that would change their lives forever. As night fell over the Golden Hotel, none of them could imagine the twists and turns that destiny had in store for them. The following days passed in a whirlwind of emotions for Jack, Sarah, and Elizabeth. The presidential suite of the Golden Hotel became a refuge where the newly reunited family members tried to reconstruct decades of lost stories. Jack observed with a mixture of amazement and concern as his mother and newly discovered aunt spent hours sharing memories, comparing experiences, and finding common ground in their disparate lives. Despite the joy of the reunion, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. The luxury surrounding them was a constant reminder of the life they could have had. One afternoon, while Sarah was resting, Jack found Elizabeth on the suite's terrace, contemplating the city. "Aunt Elizabeth," he said, approaching cautiously. "There's something I don't understand. If you have all this," he gestured, encompassing the hotel, "why did you never search for your biological family before?" Elizabeth turned to him, her eyes filled with a sadness Jack hadn't noticed before. "Oh, Jack," she sighed. "I tried, believe me. For years I hired private investigators, searched adoption records, even did DNA tests. But I always hit dead ends." She leaned on the railing, her gaze lost on the horizon. "My adoptive parents, the Parkers, were wonderful people. They gave me everything they could, including this hotel. But there was always a void in my heart, a feeling that something was missing. Jack joined her at the railing. "And now that you found my mother, how do you feel?" Elizabeth smiled, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Complete, for the first time in my life. But also guilty. I look at Sarah, see all she's suffered, and I can't help but think that it could have been me in that wheelchair, selling candy on the street." "It's not your fault," Jack said firmly. "Neither of you chose this." "I know, but still." Elizabeth let the phrase hang in the air. Then, as if making a sudden decision, she turned to Jack. "I want you to know that, no matter what happens, you two will never have to worry about money again. This hotel, everything I have, is as much Sarah's as it is mine." Jack felt a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. "Thank you, Aunt Elizabeth, but we're not looking for charity. My mother and I have managed on our own all this time." Elizabeth put a hand on his shoulder. "It's not charity, Jack. It's family. And speaking of family, there's something you should know." At that moment, Sarah came out onto the terrace in her wheelchair. "What are you two talking about?" Elizabeth exchanged a look with Jack before turning to her sister. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you both. Something about our past that could explain a lot." The three returned to the suite's interior. Elizabeth went to an elegant desk and pulled out a folder. "Years ago, when I was looking for information about my adoption, I came across this." She spread several documents on the coffee table. Sarah approached, with Jack by her side. The documents appeared to be old hospital records and yellowed newspaper clippings. "According to these records," Elizabeth explained, "we were born at St. Raphael's Hospital. But there's something strange. The official record says only one girl was born, you, Sarah." Jack frowned. "But that doesn't make sense. You're both here." Elizabeth nodded. "Exactly. And this is where things get interesting." She pointed to a newspaper clipping. 2 weeks after our birth, there was a fire in the hospital's maternity ward. Several babies died." Sarah gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God." "At first," Elizabeth continued, "I thought maybe I was one of those babies, rescued and then adopted. But the dates don't match up. And besides, there's this." She pulled out an old, crumpled photograph from the folder. The image showed a young nurse holding 2 identical babies. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, it read, "Dolores with the Parker twins, 1984. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack was the first to break it. "So, this Dolores, she stole us?" Elizabeth nodded slowly. "It seems so. I think she took advantage of the chaos of the fire to make me disappear. She probably sold me to the Parkers." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, took Elizabeth's hand. "But why? Why separate us?" "I don't know," Elizabeth replied. "But I'm determined to find out. And I think the key is finding Dolores." Jack, who had been processing all this information, suddenly had an idea. "Wait a moment. Mom, do you remember that woman who was watching you on the street? The one who said you looked like someone?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember her. She was an older woman, about 60, gray hair." Elizabeth leaned forward, her face illuminated by realization. That could be Dolores. After so many years, maybe remorse led her to seek you out. But why didn't she approach? Jack asked. "Fear, maybe," Elizabeth suggested. "Fear of the consequences of her actions." Sarah, who had been silent, suddenly spoke with a determination that surprised everyone. "We have to find her. Not to punish her, but to understand. To close this chapter of our lives." Elizabeth nodded firmly. "I agree. I'll hire the best private investigator in the country if necessary." Jack, however, had another idea. "Or we could do something simpler. Mom, what if we go back to your corner? If Dolores has been watching you, it's likely she'll come back. We could wait for her." The sisters exchanged a look. "It's risky," Elizabeth said. "But it could work." "Then it's decided," Sarah said. "Tomorrow, we'll go back to the street. But this time, I won't be alone." As the plan took shape, none of them could imagine the twists that fate had in store for them. The search for truth would lead them down unexpected paths, unearthing long-buried secrets and testing the newly formed bonds of their family. That night, as the city slept, three souls united by blood and separated by destiny prepared to face a past that threatened to change their future forever. In the suite of the Golden Hotel, amidst luxuries that contrasted with a life of deprivation, the next chapter of a story that had begun decades ago, in a hospital room and in the shadows of a cruel deception, was taking shape. The morning arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Jack, Sarah, and Elizabeth prepared for their mission with silent determination. The plan was simple: they would return to the corner where Sarah used to sell her paper flowers, hoping that the mysterious woman, possibly Dolores, would appear. Elizabeth insisted they dress discreetly to avoid drawing attention. "We don't want to scare her off if she shows up," she explained while lending Sarah some of her simpler clothes. Jack couldn't help but notice how different his mother looked in Elizabeth's clothes, as if it were a glimpse of the life she could have had. The idea unsettled him, but he pushed it aside. Today they had a more important mission. They arrived at the familiar corner shortly after noon. The sun warmed the pavement, and the bustle of the city surrounded them. For Jack and Sarah, it was a return to the daily routine they had known for years. For Elizabeth, it was stepping into a completely unfamiliar world. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mom?" Jack asked, worried about how this situation might affect Sarah. Sarah nodded firmly. "I need answers, son. We've lived in the dark for too long." They settled into their usual spot. Sarah, in her wheelchair, began making paper flowers as she always had. Jack stood nearby, pretending to sell candy, while Elizabeth sat on a nearby bench, pretending to read a book. The hours passed slowly. The sun moved across the sky, and people came and went. Occasionally, someone would stop to buy a flower or a piece of candy, oblivious to the drama unfolding. It was near sunset when Jack saw her. An older woman with gray hair and a hunched posture was slowly approaching along the sidewalk. Her eyes were fixed on Sarah, with a mixture of longing and fear. "Mom," Jack whispered, "I think it's her." Sarah looked up from her paper flowers, and her eyes met those of the woman. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The woman stopped a few meters away, as if an invisible force prevented her from coming closer. Her hands visibly trembled. Sarah, gathering all her courage, spoke first. "Hello," she said softly. "Do we know each other?" The woman seemed startled to hear Sarah's voice. She took a step back, as if about to flee, but then her gaze fell on Elizabeth, who had stood up and was approaching. The color drained from the woman's face. "No, it can't be," she murmured. Elizabeth approached, standing next to Sarah's wheelchair. "Are you Dolores?" she asked directly. The woman, Dolores, seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Her eyes darted from Sarah to Elizabeth and back, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I. Dolores stammered, backing away. Jack, fearing she might escape, quickly moved to block her path. "Please," he said, trying to keep calm, "we just want to talk." Dolores looked around, like a cornered animal. Finally, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm Dolores. And I suppose the moment of truth has arrived." Sarah extended a hand toward her. "Please, Dolores. It's been so many years. We just want to understand." Something in Sarah's voice seemed to break Dolores's last defenses. With trembling steps, she approached and sat on the bench Elizabeth had previously occupied. "I never thought I'd see you two together," Dolores said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's like seeing a ghost, two ghosts." Elizabeth knelt in front of Dolores, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "Why did you do it? Why did you separate us?" Dolores closed her eyes, as if the weight of her actions finally caught up with her. "I was young and stupid," she began. "I worked at the hospital as a nurse. When you were born, you were the most beautiful babies I had ever seen." She paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "Your mother, she was single, very young. She could barely take care of one baby, let alone two. And then, the Parkers arrived." Elizabeth tensed at the mention of her adoptive parents' name. What do they have to do with this? They had been trying to have a baby for years, Dolores explained. They were desperate. They offered me a sum of money, an amount that would change my life. All I had to do was give them one of you. Sarah gasped, bringing a hand to her chest. Jack put a comforting hand on her shoulder. Dolores continued, the words now coming out like a torrent. The fire at the hospital was convenient. In the midst of the chaos, it was easy to make a baby disappear. I told the Parkers you were an orphan, she looked at Elizabeth. And to your mother, she turned to Sarah, I said her other daughter had died in the fire. A heavy silence fell over the group. The truth, long buried, was finally coming to light, and it was more painful than any of them had imagined. How could you? Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Dolores lowered her head, unable to look into the eyes of the women whose lives she had so dramatically altered. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret what I did. I've lived with this guilt for decades. Elizabeth, struggling to maintain her composure, asked, why have you been watching Sarah? Why now, after so many years? Dolores raised her gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and determination. Because it's time to make things right. I've spent the last few years trying to gather the courage to face what I did. When I saw Sarah on this corner, I knew it was my chance to correct my mistakes. Jack, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. And what do you expect to happen now? Do you think an apology can fix decades of separation and suffering? Dolores shook her head. No, of course not. I know what I did is unforgivable. But... She searched in her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. Here's everything. Hospital records, the truth about the adoption, even a written confession from me. It's all the evidence you need to do whatever you think is necessary. Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. Why are you giving us this? Because you deserve the truth, Dolores replied. And because I'm ready to face the consequences of my actions. As the sun set over the city, bathing the scene in golden and red hues, the 5 people on that corner found themselves at a crossroads. The truth, so long sought after, was finally in their hands. But with it came new questions, new challenges. What would they do with this information? How would this affect the newly formed relationship between Sarah and Elizabeth? And what role would Dolores play in their lives from now on? As night fell, taking with it the last rays of the day, one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same for any of them. The chapter that closed that night opened the door to an uncertain future, full of possibilities both terrifying and hopeful. The days following the encounter with Dolores were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone involved. Jack, Sarah, and Elizabeth returned to the Golden Hotel, Dolores's envelope weighing as heavily emotionally as it did physically in their hands. In the privacy of the suite, they spread the contents of the envelope on the dining table. Yellow documents, old photographs, and a handwritten letter from Dolores told the complete story of their separation. I can't believe it, Sarah murmured, running her fingers over a photo of her and her mother, holding 2 identical babies. All these years. Elizabeth, with tears in her eyes, took her sister's hand. I know. It's overwhelming. Jack watched the 2 women, feeling a mixture of relief at having discovered the truth and concern about how this would affect his newly expanded family. What are we going to do now? He asked, breaking the silence. Sarah looked up from the documents, her face showing a determination that Jack had rarely seen. The first thing is to decide what to do about Dolores. We could take this to the police, Elizabeth suggested. What she did was a crime. Jack nodded, but then hesitated. Yes, but, is that what we really want? After so much time. Sarah sighed deeply. I don't know. Part of me wants her to pay for what she did, for robbing us of so many years together. She looked at Elizabeth with a mixture of love and pain. But another part understands that she has also suffered with this guilt. Elizabeth stood up and walked to the window, her silhouette outlined against the city lights. You know, she began, her voice barely a whisper, all my life I felt something was missing. Even with all the love my adoptive parents gave me, there was always a void. She turned to Sarah and Jack. But now, knowing you, knowing the truth, somehow, I feel complete. Jack approached his aunt, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. Aunt Elizabeth, what do you think we should do? Elizabeth looked at her nephew, then at her sister. I think we should talk to Dolores once more. Before making any decision. Sarah nodded slowly. I agree. We need to understand completely before deciding. The next day, they contacted Dolores and invited her to the hotel. The woman arrived, visibly nervous, her eyes red as if she had spent the night crying. In the suite's living room, Dolores sat facing the sisters and Jack. The silence was heavy, laden with decades of secrets and pain. Finally, Sarah spoke. Dolores, we've read everything. We understand what happened, but we need to know more. Why? Dolores closed her eyes, as if the weight of her actions crushed her. I was young and stupid, she began. I came from a poor family, and the money the Parkers offered, it seemed like the solution to all my problems. She opened her eyes, looking directly at Sarah. Your mother was so young, so scared. I thought I was doing the right thing. One baby with a single mother who could barely support herself, and another with a wealthy family who could give her everything. Elizabeth intervened, her voice trembling. My parents, did they know? Dolores shook her head. No, not entirely. I told them you were an orphan from the fire. They never knew the whole truth. Jack, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. And all these years? Why didn't you say anything before? Fear, Dolores replied simply. Fear of the consequences, fear of facing what I had done. But over the years, the guilt, it became unbearable. Sarah leaned forward in her wheelchair. Dolores, do you understand what you took from us? Not just from Elizabeth and me, but from my son, from our family. Dolores nodded, tears running down her cheeks. I know, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret it. I'm ready to face the consequences of my actions. If you want to take me to the police, I'll understand. A tense silence filled the room. The sisters exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Elizabeth spoke. I don't think taking you to the police will solve anything. What's done is done. We can't recover the lost years. Sarah nodded, taking her sister's hand. I agree. But Dolores, we need time. Time to process all of this, to heal. Dolores looked at them, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and remorse. I understand. And I want you to know that I'll do whatever is necessary to try to make amends, although I know it's impossible to completely repair the damage I've caused. Jack, observing the scene, felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him wanted Dolores to pay for what she had done, for the years of struggle his mother and he had faced. But another part understood that forgiveness, though difficult, could be the path to healing. Maybe, Jack said, surprising himself, this is an opportunity. An opportunity for all of us to start anew, to build something together. The three women looked at him, surprised by the wisdom in his words. Sarah smiled at her son, pride shining in her eyes. You're right, my love. Maybe this is the real gift we can take from all of this, the opportunity to be a family, to heal together. Elizabeth nodded, tears of emotion in her eyes. I'd like that. More than anything in the world. Dolores, overwhelmed by the kindness she was receiving, lowered her head. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but if you'll allow me, I'd like to be part of that healing process. Somehow. As the afternoon sun streamed through the suite's windows, bathing the room in golden light, the four felt that something had changed. A new chapter was opening before them, one full of possibilities, forgiveness, and hope. The path to healing wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult days, painful conversations, and moments of doubt. But in that instant, in that room, something precious had been born, the promise of a future together, built on truth and the desire to heal. As Sarah and Elizabeth embraced, with Jack joining them, and Dolores watching with a mixture of remorse and hope, they all felt that, for the first time in a long time, they were exactly where they were meant to be. The future, though uncertain, seemed full of promise. The weeks following the discovery of the truth were a period of adjustment for everyone. Sarah and Elizabeth, determined to make up for lost time, spent hours together each day, sharing stories of their separate lives and discovering the countless similarities they shared despite their vastly different experiences. Jack observed this new dynamic with a mixture of joy and apprehension. Seeing his mother so happy filled his heart, but he couldn't help feeling a twinge of jealousy at how much time she spent with Elizabeth. However, he strived to suppress these feelings, reminding himself that this was the opportunity his mother had always deserved. One afternoon, while the sisters were reviewing old photo albums in the suite's living room, Jack decided to go for a walk to clear his mind. Upon returning, he found Elizabeth waiting for him in the hotel lobby. "Jack," she called to him, with a warm smile. "Do you have a moment?" He nodded, intrigued, and followed her to a small empty meeting room. Elizabeth closed the door and turned to him, her expression serious but kind. "I've noticed you've been a bit distant lately. Is everything okay?" Jack was surprised by his aunt's perceptiveness. He hesitated for a moment, but then decided to be honest. "It's just that, everything has changed so fast. I'm happy for Mom, really, but sometimes I feel like I'm losing her." Elizabeth looked at him with understanding. "Oh, Jack," she said softly, moving closer to put a hand on his shoulder. "I understand how you feel. But I want you to know something, your mother adores you. Every time we talk, she can't stop talking about how proud she is of you, how much she loves you." Jack felt a lump in his throat. "I know, it's just that you're afraid she doesn't need you as much anymore," Elizabeth completed. Jack nodded, surprised by how well she understood him. "Listen," Elizabeth continued, "your mother and I are trying to make up for lost years, it's true. But that doesn't mean we're leaving you out. In fact, I wanted to talk to you about something." Jack looked at her, curious. "What is it?" Elizabeth smiled. "I've been thinking, the hotel needs an upgrade to its management system. I was considering hiring someone, but then I thought, why not give the opportunity to my brilliant nephew?" Jack's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't have any experience in hotels." "You have experience in real life, Jack. You've proven to be responsible, intelligent, and hardworking. Those are the qualities I need. Plus, you could learn the business from the inside. What do you say? Would you be interested in working with me?" Jack was speechless for a moment. The offer was unexpected, but he felt it was exactly what he needed, an opportunity to be part of this new life, to contribute. I'd love to," he finally responded, a genuine smile lighting up his face. Elizabeth hugged him tightly. "Excellent. We'll start next week. And Jack, I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace anyone in your life. I just want to be a part of it, if you'll let me." Jack nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Aunt Elizabeth." Meanwhile, in the suite, Sarah had noticed the absence of her son and sister. Taking advantage of the moment of solitude, she took out her phone and, after hesitating for a moment, dialed a number she had been avoiding for weeks. "Dolores? It's Sarah. I think it's time we talk." An hour later, Dolores arrived at the hotel. Sarah received her in the suite, alone. The two women looked at each other for a long moment, decades of unspoken history floating between them. "Thank you for coming," Sarah began. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about everything you told us." Dolores nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I understand if you're still angry with me, Sarah. What I did." "I'm not angry," Sarah interrupted, surprising both of them with the truth in her words. "I was angry, yes. Hurt, confused, betrayed. But now I just want to understand," Sarah continued. "I want to know everything about the day we were born, about my mother, about how you made the decision. I want to understand so I can forgive completely, so we can move forward." And so, for the next few hours, Dolores shared every detail she could remember. She spoke of the fear and desperation of a young nurse, of the sadness in the eyes of a single mother who felt she couldn't handle two babies, of the immediate regret she felt upon handing Elizabeth over. Sarah listened in silence, tears running down her cheeks as she finally filled in the gaps in her history. When Dolores finished, Sarah moved closer and, in a gesture that surprised them both, took the older woman's hands in hers. "Dolores," she said softly, "what you did changed our lives forever. You stole years from us that we can never get back. But also, in a twisted way, you've given us this moment. This opportunity to be together now, to appreciate what we have." Dolores looked at her, astonished. "Sarah, I'm not saying what you did was right," Sarah continued. "But I'm choosing to forgive you. For me, for Elizabeth, for Jack. Because carrying this resentment will only hurt us more." The two women embraced, decades of pain and secrets dissolving into tears of relief and forgiveness. When Jack and Elizabeth returned to the suite, they found a scene they never would have imagined: Sarah and Dolores, sitting together, looking at old photographs and laughing softly. Elizabeth looked at Jack, a silent question in her eyes. He smiled and nodded, understanding that this was another step in their new life, in their reconstructed family. That night, as the four of them dined together, sharing stories and laughter, Jack looked around and felt a warmth in his chest. His family had grown, had become complicated, but had also strengthened. And he was ready to embrace every moment of it. The future, which once seemed so uncertain and limited, now stretched out before them full of possibilities. And together, they were ready to write the next chapters of their story. The following months brought a series of changes and challenges for the newly reunited family. Jack, determined to take advantage of the opportunity Elizabeth had offered him, immersed himself fully in learning the hotel business. Every morning he arrived early at the hotel, eager to absorb everything he could about management, customer service, and finances. Elizabeth, for her part, marveled at how quickly her nephew learned. "You have a natural gift for this, Jack," she told him one afternoon as they reviewed the month's financial reports together. "I think you'll soon be ready to handle bigger projects." Jack smiled, feeling proud but also a little overwhelmed. "Thanks, Aunt Elizabeth. But I still have a lot to learn." "And you will," Elizabeth assured him. "In fact, I was thinking, how would you like to be in charge of supervising the renovation of the hotel's west wing?" Jack's eyes widened. "Really? That's a big responsibility." Elizabeth nodded. "It is. But I think you're ready. Besides, I'll always be here to support you." Meanwhile, Sarah was experiencing her own changes. With Elizabeth's support and the guidance of the best doctors money could buy, she had begun an intensive physiotherapy program. Although progress was slow and often painful, Sarah refused to give up. One day, she told Jack one night as he helped her with her exercises, "I'm going to walk again. I'm going to dance at your wedding." Jack laughed, but his eyes shone with emotion. "I know, Mom. And I'll be there to see you take every step." The relationship between Sarah and Elizabeth also continued to flourish. The sisters spent hours each day catching up on their lives, joyfully discovering similarities in their tastes and personalities. "It's as if time hasn't passed," Elizabeth commented one afternoon as they shared a photo album. "As if we've always been together." Sarah smiled, but there was a shadow of sadness in her eyes. "Sometimes I wonder what our life would have been like if..." Elizabeth took her sister's hand. "I know. I think about it too. But we can't change the past. We can only make the most of the present and build our future." Dolores, for her part, had become a constant but discreet presence in their lives. Although forgiveness had been offered, trust was something that was still slowly being rebuilt. However, Dolores strived every day to demonstrate her remorse and her desire to be part of the family. One day, while helping Sarah with her therapy, Dolores gathered the courage to make a suggestion. "I've been thinking, maybe we could use some of the money the Parkers gave me to create a foundation. To help single mothers and babies in difficult situations." Sarah looked at her, surprised by the proposal. That would be wonderful, Dolores." The idea quickly gained the support of the entire family. Elizabeth offered her business expertise to help establish the foundation, while Jack suggested using part of the hotel facilities to offer training and support to women who needed it. As they worked together on this new project, family bonds strengthened even more. Each found their place and purpose within this new dynamic. However, not everything was perfect. There were days when old resentments and fears surfaced. Moments when Jack felt overwhelmed by expectations, or when Sarah became frustrated with the slowness of her physical progress. There were heated discussions and tears shed. But every time they faced an obstacle, they did it together. They supported each other, reminding themselves that love and family were stronger than any challenge. One night, as they celebrated the success of their new foundation's first charity gala, Jack looked around and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. His mother, radiant and stronger every day, chatted animatedly with guests. Elizabeth, elegant as always, discussed future plans with potential donors. And even Dolores, in a quieter corner, helped a young mother calm her baby. At that moment, Jack understood that his family, though unconventional and born from painful circumstances, was exactly what they all needed. Each of them had found their place, their purpose, and together they were creating something beautiful and meaningful. As the night progressed, Jack approached his mother and offered her his hand. "How about we try that dance, Mom?" Sarah looked at him, surprised. "But Jack, I still can't." "Trust me," he said with a smile. Carefully, he helped his mother to her feet. Although her legs were still weak, Sarah managed to stand upright with Jack's support. Slowly, they began to move to the rhythm of the soft music. Elizabeth, seeing them, quickly approached. "May I join?" she asked, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Soon, the three were together, moving gently, laughing and crying at the same time. It was more than a dance, it was a celebration of their journey, their union, their future. Dolores watched them from afar, a mixture of joy and remorse on her face. Sarah saw her and, with a gesture, invited her to join. After a moment of hesitation, Dolores approached, completing the family circle. As the music enveloped them, each of them felt that, finally, they were exactly where they were meant to be. The past, with all its pains and secrets, no longer had power over them. The future, bright and full of possibilities, awaited them. And at that moment, dancing together under the soft lights of the ballroom, they knew that, whatever happened, they would face each new day as what they were, a family, united by love and strengthened by the trials they had overcome. The success of the charity gala marked a turning point for the family. The Parker Foundation, as they decided to call it, quickly gained recognition for its work supporting single mothers and vulnerable families. Jack, with his natural charisma and growing management experience, became the public face of the foundation, while Elizabeth handled the financial and strategic aspects. Sarah, for her part, found a new purpose in sharing her story and providing emotional support to the women who came to the foundation. Her progress in physiotherapy, though slow, was steady, and every small advance was celebrated by the whole family. However, fate had one more surprise in store for them. One afternoon, as Jack was reviewing some requests for help that had come to the foundation, a name caught his attention: Mary Ellen Parker. "Mom," he called to Sarah, who was nearby reviewing some documents. "Do you know any Mary Ellen Parker?" Sarah frowned, thoughtful. "Not that I remember." "Why?" Jack showed her the request. "She's asked the foundation for help. She says she's looking for her daughter, who was given up for adoption years ago." A tense silence fell over the room. Sarah took the paper with trembling hands, reading every word with growing amazement. "Jack," she whispered, I think this could be my mother. Our grandmother." The news shook the entire family. Elizabeth was called immediately, and together they decided to investigate further before making any moves. Dolores, when informed, visibly paled. I thought she had passed away years ago," she confessed. "I never imagined." The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. They hired a private investigator to verify Mary Ellen's identity and her story. Each new piece of information that arrived seemed to confirm the incredible: Sarah and Elizabeth's mother, whom they had believed dead for decades, was alive and looking for them. Finally, after weeks of investigation and deliberation, they decided to arrange a meeting. On the agreed day, the tension in the hotel suite was palpable. Jack couldn't stop pacing back and forth, while Sarah and Elizabeth held hands, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. When Mary Ellen entered the room, time seemed to stand still. She was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and lines of expression that spoke of a difficult life, but her eyes, Her eyes were identical to Sarah's and Elizabeth's. "My girls," Mary Ellen whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "My babies." Sarah and Elizabeth rose in unison, moving as if in a trance towards the woman who had given them life. The embrace that followed was intense, charged with decades of lost love and longing. Jack watched the scene, feeling a mixture of joy for his mother and aunt, and a strange feeling of being out of place. It was Dolores who approached him, putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're part of this too, Jack," she said softly. "You're the bond that kept them together all these years." When they finally separated from the embrace, Mary Ellen looked around, her eyes stopping on Jack and Dolores. "You must be my grandson," she said, extending a trembling hand towards Jack. He nodded, moving closer to hug her. Then, Mary Ellen turned to Dolores. For a moment, the tension in the room was palpable. Dolores took a step back, fear visible in her eyes. But Mary Ellen surprised them all. "Thank you," she said simply. "For taking care of them all these years, in your own way." Dolores broke down crying, the weight of decades of guilt finally releasing. The following hours were a torrent of stories, explanations, and apologies. Mary Ellen told them how, after giving birth, she had fallen into a deep postpartum depression. Convinced she couldn't properly care for her daughters, she had left them in the hospital's care temporarily, intending to recover and come back for them. "But when I returned," she explained through tears, "they told me one of you had died in the fire and the other had been given up for adoption. I was devastated, I lost my mind for a while. When I finally recovered, years later, no one could or would give me any information." Mary Ellen's story was a painful reminder of how a series of misunderstandings and wrong decisions could alter the course of so many lives. As the night progressed, the atmosphere in the room changed. The initial shock gave way to cautious hope, and then to cautious joy. Plans began to form. Mary Ellen would move to the city, they would help her get settled, they would integrate her into the life of the foundation. In a moment of calm, Jack found himself alone on the terrace, observing the city lights. Elizabeth joined him, putting an arm around his shoulders. "How do you feel about all this?" she asked softly. Jack sighed. "It's overwhelming. But also beautiful. Seeing Mom so happy, it's all I've ever wanted for her." Elizabeth hugged him tightly. "You're an amazing young man, Jack. I don't know if I tell you enough, but I'm so proud of you, of how you've handled all of this." Inside, Sarah watched her son and sister on the terrace. Mary Ellen approached her, taking her hand. "You have a wonderful son," she said softly. Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with pride and love. "He is. He's kept me strong all these years." Mary Ellen looked at her daughter, regret visible in her eyes. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you, for both of you." "You're here now," Sarah replied, squeezing her mother's hand. "And we have the whole future ahead of us." As the night progressed, the newly expanded family remained together, sharing stories, laughing and, sometimes, crying. It was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one full of promises and possibilities. And although they knew the road wouldn't always be easy, that there would be adjustments and challenges to come, they also knew they would face each obstacle together, as the family they were always meant to be. The months following the reunion with Mary Ellen were a period of adjustment and discovery for everyone. The family worked hard to integrate the matriarch into their lives, helping her settle into a small apartment near the hotel and finding ways to involve her in the Parker Foundation's activities. Jack, in particular, found himself developing a special bond with his newly discovered grandmother. Mary Ellen, with her wisdom and life experience, became an invaluable source of advice and support for the young man as he navigated his growing responsibilities at the hotel and the foundation. One afternoon, while sharing coffee on the hotel terrace, Mary Ellen said to Jack, "You know, you remind me a lot of my father, your great-grandfather. He had that same spark in his eyes, that determination." Jack smiled, touched by the comparison. "I wish I could have known him. He would be very proud of you," Mary Ellen replied, taking his hand. "Of all of you." Meanwhile, Sarah continued to progress in her physical therapy. With the constant support of her family and the additional motivation of wanting to walk alongside her newly found mother, her advances accelerated. One day, during a particularly challenging session, Sarah managed to take several steps without assistance. The room erupted in applause and tears of joy. Elizabeth, who had been watching, ran to hug her sister. "You did it, Sarah," Elizabeth sobbed. "I knew you would." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, looked around at her gathered family, her sister, her son, her mother, and even Dolores, who had become a constant and supportive presence. "We did it," she corrected gently. "All together." As time passed, the Parker Foundation grew and thrived. The hotel, under the combined management of Elizabeth and Jack, became a model of ethical and socially responsible business. Part of the facilities were dedicated to temporarily housing mothers and families in vulnerable situations, offering them not only a roof over their heads, but also training and job opportunities. Dolores, seeking to redeem her past, devoted herself body and soul to the foundation. Her experience as a nurse proved invaluable in creating prenatal and postnatal care programs for young mothers. A year after the reunion with Mary Ellen, the family decided to organize a grand celebration. Not only to commemorate the success of the foundation, but also to celebrate their union and their journey. On the night of the gala, the main ballroom of the Golden Hotel shone with lights and decorations. Guests from all walks of society mingled, from foundation beneficiaries to important figures from the business and political world. Jack, elegant in a dark suit, took the stage to give a speech. As he looked at the crowd, his eyes stopped on his family in the front row, his mother, Sarah, radiant and standing with the help of a cane, his Aunt Elizabeth, smiling with pride, his grandmother Mary Ellen, with tears of happiness in her eyes, and Dolores, whose presence was a testimony to the power of forgiveness and redemption. "Just over a year ago," Jack began, his voice clear and emotional, "it was just my mother and me, selling candy and paper flowers on a street corner. Today, we're here, surrounded by a family we didn't know we had and friends who have become family." He paused, taking a breath to control his emotion. "Our journey hasn't been easy. There has been pain, secrets, and losses. But there has also been love, forgiveness, and second chances. The Parker Foundation was born from that journey, from our desire to transform our pain into hope for others." As Jack continued his speech, detailing the foundation's achievements and future plans, Sarah couldn't contain her tears of pride. Elizabeth hugged her around the shoulders, and Mary Ellen took her hand. In concluding, Jack raised his glass. "To family, both the one given to us and the one we choose. To second chances and new beginnings. And to the future, which we'll build together, one day at a time." The crowd erupted in applause, and the Parker family joined on stage for a group hug that seemed to encapsulate their entire journey. Later that night, when most of the guests had left, the family gathered on the hotel terrace. The city sparkled below them, a sea of lights and possibilities. Sarah, leaning on her cane but standing on her own, looked at each of her loved ones. "I never imagined my life could be like this," she said softly. "Thank you all for being part of this journey." Jack smiled, remembering those difficult days that now seemed so distant. "You know, Mom, I think we were always rich. We just didn't know it." Elizabeth nodded, understanding. "Rich in love, in perseverance, in hope." Mary Ellen, with tears in her eyes, added, "And now, rich in family and purpose." Dolores, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "And in forgiveness. Let's not forget the healing power of forgiveness." As the night progressed, the family remained together, sharing memories, laughing, and making plans for the future. Each of them had found their place, their purpose, and together they had created something beautiful from the ashes of their past. Jack looked around at this family that had grown in ways he never could have imagined. From selling candy on the street to running a foundation and a hotel, from feeling alone to being surrounded by love. The journey had been long and sometimes painful, but every step had led them to this moment. And as the first light of dawn began to peek over the horizon, Jack knew with certainty that this was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together, as the family they were always meant to be. As the weeks turned into months, and the months into years, the Parker family continued to grow and evolve. The foundation expanded its reach, opening branches in neighboring cities and even venturing into international aid. Jack, with his natural leadership skills honed by experience, became the CEO of both the hotel chain and the foundation, working tirelessly to balance business success with social responsibility. Sarah's recovery progressed steadily. The day she walked unassisted across the hotel lobby was a moment of triumph celebrated by all. She channeled her experiences into writing a memoir, which became a bestseller and inspired countless others facing adversity. Elizabeth, ever the visionary, spearheaded a new initiative within the foundation focused on education and vocational training for underprivileged youth. Her programs gained national recognition and were soon being implemented in schools across the country. Mary Ellen, embracing her role as the family matriarch, became a beloved figure in the community. Her wisdom and compassion touched the lives of many, and she found joy in sharing her life stories with the younger generations at the foundation's events. Dolores, having found redemption through her tireless work with the foundation, eventually retired but remained a cherished part of the family. Her story of transformation became a powerful testament to the possibility of change and the importance of second chances. As for Jack, he found love in an unexpected place. During a foundation event, he met Emma, a dedicated social worker whose passion for helping others matched his own. Their wedding, held in the Golden Hotel's grand ballroom, was a joyous celebration of love and family, with Sarah fulfilling her promise to dance with her son. 5 years after their initial reunion, the family gathered once again on the hotel's terrace. The city skyline had changed, with new buildings rising and old ones renovated, much like how their lives had transformed. Jack, now a father himself to twins, watched as his children played with their cousins, Elizabeth's adopted daughter and Sarah's miracle baby, born against all odds. The sight of 3 generations of Parkers, laughing and loving, filled him with an indescribable sense of peace and gratitude. Sarah, standing tall and proud, raised her glass. "To family," she said, her voice strong and clear. "To the twists and turns of fate that brought us together, to the love that kept us strong, and to the future we continue to build." As they all echoed her toast, Jack reflected on their journey. From a boy selling candy on the street to a man surrounded by a loving family and purpose, he realized that their story was more than just a tale of reunion. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of forgiveness, and the endless possibilities that open up when love conquers all. The sun set on the city, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, a fitting backdrop to the golden hearts that beat in unison on that terrace. And as night fell, bringing with it the promise of a new day, the Parker family stood united, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that together, they could overcome anything. Their story, once marked by separation and loss, had become an epic of love, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of family. And though their journey had been long and often difficult, they all agreed that every step, every tear, and every triumph had been worth it. For in finding each other, they had found themselves. And in healing their past, they had built a future brighter than any of them could have ever imagined. As Jack tucked his children into bed that night, he smiled, knowing that the legacy of love, perseverance, and hope would continue through them. The story of the Parker family would go on, inspiring generations to come, a living proof that even in the darkest of times, love has the power to light the way home.